Youngdom. Youngdom.
All right, what's good, Young Black Voices members? If you have been following me on any form of social media, primarily Instagram, I kind of deleted Twitter. I really don't tweet. I sound old as shit. I really don't tweet. But if you've been following it, follow me on Instagram. You know what this is, and I'm sorry if the video is 2 days late. I've been a little tired from working and a lot of different things, but things will get back smooth, progressively. So what I'm doing, right? The entire month of November, we're talking about politics, and more specifically voting for the first couple of weeks, this week, and then next week, because next Tuesday, well, not next Tuesday, but Tuesday, the November the 5th, is voting. National voting. It's the voting day, blah, blah, blah. That's just, because that's just how it is. Here I don't know about other countries, but here in America, we have a voting day, a day of voting, I think on the first or second Tuesday of November, depending on, how the month structure itself. So my main focus is on the first 2 weeks being voting, and then the last 3 being on different forms of politics. And then that's what I'm going to do from now on. Is each month I'm going to give you a different topic, and I'm going to give you like planned out topics. So if you want to jump on it, you can jump on, and I'll be asking around for them people to jump on and everything. Just because generally my computer is currently down and being stupid. Anyway, without further ado, let's jump right into it. So, voting, or more so the importance of voting. That's what we're talking about today. That's the conversation piece for today. And with that actually being said, before we could talk about voting, we got to talk about what it means to vote. So, which it really just means to cast a ballot for a candidate in a nutshell. And not too much going into it, but that's about it. It's a formal indication of a choice between 2 or more candidates or courses or actions, expressed typically through a ballot or a show of hands by a vote, to give or register a vote. Right? That's what it means to vote. So, and for anybody who is new to the channel, so if you're new to the channel, everything I talk about here is specifically tailored towards black people, because I am a black man, and I can only speak on my experience, on behalf of my people and behalf of like experiences, and I have people that speak on behalf of their experiences, everything, because I know I haven't experienced it all. Voting in the black community has been a really weird ride, if I could say so myself. Just take a stroll down memory lane back to the 1600s, right? 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, for like 3 centuries. So that's 300 years, 3 centuries. Actually 400 years, because it started in like the 14 and 1500s. 400 years slavery, and we would not even. I can't even say 400 years slavery. So for 400 years, we were basically enslaved people. African people were enslaved to the Americans or the colonies, or however you would want to put it. That's 400 years, from 1500 all the way to like 1865, or whatever the timeline was. It's probably even less than that. It was probably about like 200, give or take. So it's really weird on the analytics of it, because first known documents of slavery started in like 1619. So it's kind of weird. It's either 300, not 300, but 200 or 200 to 400 years, give or take, that we were enslaved. specifically in this country, is about 200. But anyway, so from the 1600s all the way to the 1800s, we were seen as property. We weren't actually citizens, if you get what I'm saying. And then for anybody who wants to bring up the 3/5 compromise, we were basically treated as 3/5 of a person. That means for every 5 white people, 3 of their slaves were treated as a vote. So if you wanted to bring that up, there that is. So being treated as property and being seen as property and not having any form of rights under any laws, because the laws are so skewed against us, skewed against African slaves. That is how it was. We had no rights. We had no voting. We had no voice, if that makes sense. Fast forward, Emancipation Proclamation, ratified December 26th, I think, December 26th, December 29th, or somewhere around that. Let me actually double check that because I'm not 100% sure. I don't want to be factual. Because I just want to be correct with everything that I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so it was ratified February 1st of actually 1865, even though that it was passed by the Senate in April 8th, 1864. So officially slavery ended by the law standards on February 1st, 1865. It didn't really get passed down to us until trickled down to everybody finally until 1868. But that's besides the point. That is when these slaves became quote unquote free. At that point, now the policies changed, because now that they're free people, that they are actually people, they're citizens of this land, it's now time to get them to vote, because now that you have this overwhelming amount of people who are just in slavery, in bondage, that don't know anything about the system and don't know anything about voting, they just know that they want to choose somebody that's got their best interests in heart, you can now manipulate them. So fast forward, and I say fast forward at least 3 years after 1868, so I say give or take 1872, you have the Black Codes, or basically the era of Jim Crow in the late 1800s, that would inevitably become like a new form of slavery. It's a new form of bondage thrusted onto the black community, or not even black community, but these now freed slaves for the past 3 to 4 years, to the point of where they weren't allowed to vote. I mean, that was it. They went, we transitioned from they're not allowed to read, they're not allowed to write, they're not allowed to own property, so you can now do all these things, but you can't vote, because they knew for a fact that they would not vote or align themselves with the same political views as their former masters or their now bosses, or So that's when that really did kick off and get started, and that was something that was widespread. The Jim Crow era was a very disgusting time in this country's history that I feel like should never be forgotten, because there's so much atrocities that happened there. The burning of Black Wall Street, the suppression of votes in the South, the North doing absolutely nothing to do anything about it, and just a lot that happened during this time frame, right? So now let's fast forward to modern day, 2019. This is 2019. Fast forward to modern day. And what we're looking at is how our votes can turn the tides, and there's just the general vibe of it is just the importance of the black vote, and how it can pretty much influence an entire nation. First and foremost, I have to predecessor by saying this: black people historically have been leaning more towards the left, more of democratic, with democratic liberal views, because of whatever reason. another topic. A couple episodes down, you gotta wait for that one. Just that's their political views, and it's just something that's always been inside the black household and been a part of what happens. So I would say 9 out of 10, basically 90% of the black community votes Democratic, right? And it really does show, as you see that according to bookings.edu, the amount of black voters, well, the number, I'm not going to say the amount, but the number of black voters has pretty much been the same from the 1980s all the way up until now. There was slight dips in like 96 and 2000, but then those are kind of like the Bush, the Bush eras, and then the Clinton era. So there was a lot of stuff right there. So can't really blame you. But excuse me. So comparative to Caucasian people, because Caucasian people always dominate the votes and dominating the voting polls, right? So comparative to to Caucasian people, African Americans were like in like 1 percentage point of their average. We were at 65.2, they were at 66.1. That's in 2008. Then it was actually higher in 2012, of course, because we wanted to keep Obama in, as we just dominated 66.6 versus their 64.1. In 2016, however, the turnout did dip to 59.6. The white numbers were, it was still lower than the white people because of the fact they had like 65.3, and that's the time that Donald Trump was elected to be our president. So as you see, like, the black vote is really something that is clamored for, right? Politicians know that the influence that African Americans have is vast, right? And there's the rich history of how black people can influence is crazy, because you have, during slave times, anybody who was free or anybody who had a free thinking mind could influence a multitude of things. Think of Harriet Tubman. Think of, what's his name? What is his name? I can't remember his name, but he led a rebellion. It's gonna come to me later, and I'm gonna feel so stupid, but it's gonna come to me later. He led a rebellion, a slave rebellion, killed a bunch of slave owners and everything. It's gonna come to me later. You think of, there's a lot of different things throughout history. You think of Martin Luther King, Muhammad Ali. You think of Malcolm X. You think of Rosa Parks. You think of all these different people. And those are just notable names, by the way. I'm not, just specifically targeting or even talk about these people, because it's just because they are normal names in the community, and that's how it is. However, when you have that much influence as they did, and how they turned the tides of everything, especially during like the civil rights era, for example, how they turned the tides and actually got these sorts of rights for black people, and got these more inclusive and more in tune with the black community, to the point that it actually started to change the hearts of many Caucasian people and people of other ethnicities to the strife that's happening in the black community. Keep in mind that at this time there was strife with everything, so I'm not gonna everybody was struggling, so I'm not gonna like pass judgment on the one or say that one was struggling more than another. But at that point, there was so much influence in the black community that it pulled people towards our struggle, had them or granted them the understanding of it, and turned it into, oh, well, there it is. There's the big problem, this underlying problem that we are having right now, and what can we do to fix it as a country? So for a long time, pretty much for the longest time, politicians have known the black vote is important, right? So second to Caucasian people, black people are at the polls all the time. It's not like it's different. Black people are at the polls all the time. And there are some, I'm not going to lie, there are some who think that their votes do not matter. There are some who disagree with this notion and think that you should vote every year or every 4 years, depending on, the election. If it's a primary for a governor or a senator or just a local alderman, you should definitely vote. So with all I've been saying, let's just get down to it. The importance of voting is voting allows you to elect people with your best interest or your community's best interest at heart to get things done. Example, currently we have a structure in most cities where it's a mayor, a senator, and a governor, right? And then under them is like aldermen and representatives and kind of like a few different things, right? So these people, and their job is to make sure, especially when it comes to like the representatives, the governors, the senators, these people, their job is to go up to Capitol Hill and let them know what's going on in their states, just in that statewide. But when it comes down to the cities, that's when it's kind of a shift, because most people don't care about the citywide elections, that they just focus on the presidential elections because they think that it matters. Granted, it does, but you have to kind of think of what's more important, something that happens on a federal level that could trickle down or may not be able to trickle down or may never even get to you, or something that happens real time in your city concerning your community. This is what you really have to think of. So the importance of voting in the black community is trying to vote people in is going to help this community as much as possible. And it's not saying that we're out here begging, we're out here asking for this help, but we're out here electing people. We're trying to elect people in this sense, trying to elect people that help us and generally align with our views and our viewpoints and our struggles that can relate to us. So, yeah, that's just the basis of it. The importance of, and I mean, I'm not even going to repeat it. That's just the bottom line. It's the importance of voting. Now, the black vote has always been, as I said earlier, a hot commodity, right? Because they know that it's one of the scarcest things, and it's something that could turn the tide of anything. Why do you think Obama really won? It wasn't because of like what he was saying. I mean, it's partially because if you ask any black person why they voted for Obama in 2008, it's generally because he was black. And they wanted to change. They wanted to see something different. They wouldn't want to see this rich old white guys. They wanted to see something new, a new face, a new fresh take on the country, a new fresh look at the country. There's something that's been drab and dreary this whole time, and they got it. They got it in the form of Obama, and pretty much after that, it was pretty much crap because nobody really wanted them to do anything, and pretty much that's it. So I'm gonna read this article that's kind of geared towards the 2020 election, which is currently going on. So by this time next year, we will be discussing and I'm gonna just foreshadow ahead a year, but by this time next year, I will be discussing the potential candidates for the presidency and how it may run out and kind of just stuff like that. But for right now, we're gonna kind of jump ahead or even jump into this topic and learn some of the history of the black voters from 1976 all the way to 2020. This is presented to us by NBC News. I really don't like using news sites, but this is one of the more interesting reads that I found. So, and this is by Steve Koronacki. That's a weird name. Not that long ago, there were just a slender fraction of the party one kept at arm's length by presidential candidates. But today, black voters have emerged in a muscular political force in one of the most intensely courted constituencies in democratic policies. In 2020, they are likely to account for at least 1 out of every 4 ballot cast for a party's presidential primaries, more than tripling and perhaps quadrupling the share that they accounted for a few decades ago. It's a political and demographic revolution over the course of 40 years that we were able to document here through exiting polls, which major media organizations have been sponsoring on a wide scale for every Democratic presidential primary since 1976. Just kind of give you a great overview. So it all begins in 1976 when the Voting Rights Act was barely a decade old. So it was the Voters' Rights Act was, of course, passed in, I think, 1975, 1974, one of those years. So it's almost a decade old. It was barely. So it was 1966. 1966. So it's barely a decade old. And then we have all white candidates. Fields were the norm, and the ties between African Americans and the Democratic Party were strained. And it extends through the 2016 campaign as well, by which point that bond had strengthened and sealed, all while a broader reshuffling had pushed older and blue-collared white voters towards the GOP, left Democrats more reliant than ever on support from non-white voters. Now, I just want y'all to know that sentence right there is really important, because they were focusing and targeting non-white voters, aka who did I just say was the second most prominent inside of elections, inside of voting, black people. When you see this fact that the GOP mostly caters towards white people because they know for a fact that they have their vote off rip, and it's in every state, in every county, and everything, they go towards these people. They go towards these people, and that's how they get their votes. Is how to get their influence. Is how to get into office. The Democrats are a bit different, and a couple weeks from now, I'm gonna be talking about what it is different and how it does differ between like Republicans, black conservatives, black liberals, stuff like that. So we're gonna talk about that a little bit later. But historically, black people have chosen to vote democratically or more left-leaning, and the reason being because of the fact that at a certain point Republicans started to be the new Democrats. Because let me give you a bit of a history lesson. Back in the 1800s, the 16, 15, 16, 17, 1800s, Republicans were actually not as bad as they are, or were perceived not as bad as you perceive them to be. They weren't, a good amount of them weren't racist. They were bigoted like hell, but it wasn't to the point where they were considered to be racist blatantly. They were more subtle with it. I say like that. They weren't openly racist. While the Democrats were primarily openly racist and centered in the South, which was primarily racist because they didn't really like black people. So a short time after that, you had this tonal shift in what was happening. So now the Democrats, or the left-leaning liberals, were starting to be more of a passive-aggressive racist, if that makes sense. I'm not saying like all or the majority of Democrats are racist, but historically speaking, a lot of Democrats are pretty messed up in the head, and they don't want to accept anything other than what they want you to accept, or they don't want you to accept anything unless they want you to accept it. But anywho, in 2016, African Americans made up 20% of the Democratic primary voters, the most ever. Keyword: the most ever. And that share is expected to climb in 2020, especially with the presence of two major black candidates, and could be decisive in determining a party's nominee. In a nod to the crucial role of black voters now play in the party, the Democratic National Committee has once again designated South Carolina's primary as one of four leadoff contests. In 2016, the state's Democratic primary electorates was 61% black. That's a lot. That's like literally over half. That's 10% over half being black. That's insane. I feel like that's insane. But 2020 then presents a range of questions when it comes out to black voters? Will they, as in 2016 with Hillary Clinton, 08 and with Barack Obama, coalesce behind a single candidate? To what degree will they be motivated to back a black candidate? And if this is a significant factor, which black candidate it will position to benefit? Will divisions within the black electorate emerge based on age, gender, geographic, or other factors? Will any of the non-black candidates attract anyone? All right, and will it? Jesus. All right. Where was I at? Will the division between no. Okay, will any of the non-black candidates attract significant support from African American voters? And could Joe Biden's decades of relation building with black party leaders, along with memories of his partnership with Obama, translate into endorsements and grassroots support? The data they are presented here, some exit polls that were conducted on various media organizations and individual state primaries, especially the older contests. The data was often gathered by CBS News and the New York Times. The data picks up with the 1976 campaign. While black voters have been siding with Democratic presidential candidates since at least the days of Franklin D. Roosevelt, with their allegiance reaching new heights during Lyndon Johnson's presidency, the depth of their loyalty remained an open question. Black politicians were winning office in large numbers, a handful in Congress, some in big cities, yada yada yada, and some in state legislatures, and it's kind of everything like that. The 76 campaign played out as debates over busing and fair housing, rural neighborhoods in the North. The rising black constituency posed a strategic dilemma for the all-white roster of Democratic candidates, which weighed outreach against fears of backlash from blue-collar white ethics. So, and it's pretty much all the same. I'm not even going to keep repeating, because it is basically repeating that the black vote matters. All right? This is the bottom line of it. The black vote matters. So when you kind of think back and look at different elections, right? And then I want everybody to do this, right? So as you listen to this, think back and look upon certain things that have conspired. You know what I'm saying? Go back to the 2008 primaries and then see the breakdown between black, Hispanic, Asian, white, and kind of other people voting, and see where the large chunk of it is, right? See where that large portion goes to. And even go further than that. Go back to at the time of Franklin D. Roosevelt, as I just mentioned, in the 40s, if I'm not mistaken, 40s, 30s, kind of stuff like that, during the Great Depression. You can see that it was specifically tailored towards that as well. Even back then, even back when black people weren't even treated as equal partnerships in pretty much anything that they were doing. And this is back in the 30s. This is after slavery. This is still in the midst of Jim Crow being a prominent force in this country. It wasn't until the 50s and the 60s did everybody start jumping on the bandwagon of civil rights for African Americans, even though we've been a part of this country for at least 200 years at this point. Well, 100 years accurately at this point. Really sad. It's really sad. But that is it, you guys. Well, I'm gonna say this last thing, then I'm gonna leave. Voting is really, really important in the black community. More often than not, our communities are forgotten because of the fact that most of us don't care, right? And we elect people who see that we don't care, and they don't present any form of remorse or caring nature towards our community, right? So to fix that, we need to go out on November 5th to whatever state you are, not even whatever state, whatever city that you're in, and get the aldermen in your areas changed to people who directly relate to the issues happening in that community. change the outlook of your representation in your communities, and your communities will change itself. Granted, it is not just with the politicians. You have to change yourself and the people around you as well, not even changing them to the fact, to the point of, oh, we're going to change them and they're going to do this, they're going to do that, but changing them to this more of a community driven mindset and not more of a selfish mindset that black people just tend to be on. It's just like, if it's not my problem, it's just not my problem. It should be everybody's problem. It should be everybody's problem. The state of the roads in black communities, or the state of the schools in black communities. It doesn't make sense that and this is just for everybody, in all honesty. It's not just specifically in the black community, but that's what I'm talking about right now. It doesn't make sense that in some of these areas in the black communities that the textbooks are so old that it doesn't even reference Obama's reign, election, or Obama's time as president at all, and it doesn't talk about any significant events past like 9/11 and the Bush administration. It doesn't make sense that we don't have the accurate funding to give these children in these areas computers that they could utilize for research. We don't give them any options outside of like sports and drugs, gang banging, and pretty much rapping. So that is something that we can kind of push forward if you were to go out and vote somebody in that aligns with that. And also, voting helps us get a threshold or a foot inside of representation, as far as in like at the political standpoint. Now, not all the time when you vote somebody in that's like you is it actually beneficial, because power does things to a man. But at least vote people in that have your best interest in heart. That's all I'm gonna say on that. So, final verdict for this one: voting is important in the black community because it helps us tell our narrative. You know what I'm saying? Like, for far too long we haven't gotten a chance to tell our narrative in the right light. It's just everybody else telling it for us. So we need to kind of switch that, take back our power, because our votes do matter, and our votes have mattered in the past. So go out November 5th. That's voting day. Go out there, vote, do what you can to make your community better. But not only that, you need to go out on a limb and do things in your community. Side note. So without further ado, peace.